You are driving through a beautiful scenic landscape with your family, bewildered by the natural beauty. Around the next bend, the scenery opened up to what is miles of moonscape. Hayfields, meadows, and forests are burned to the ground. You wonder, what the hell caused this? Then you stop for gas. The price is outrageous. You only fill the tank halfway because you just can't afford it. As you put the cap back on, you run into the convenience store and look for the prices of some beef jerky. $10. Outrageous. You could have sworn that just a few years back you could have picked up the same snack for a few bucks. You hop back in the car and head down the road, disheartened by your poor experience. You wonder to yourself, why is this? In recent years, restrictions on diesel trucks have pushed the industry to catastrophic stresses that touch the lives of those in the industry, as well as the United States in general. The environmental impact of such regulation is already driving our beloved American landscape towards the dreaded wasteland so oftentimes it's depicted as our future. With such destruction, we risk destroying an integral part of American culture we can all relate to as a society. Today, we will highlight the economic impact, environmental impact, and cultural impact of modern EPA restrictions on diesels. Modern EPA restrictions on diesel motors have intense environmental consequences. It is not an uncommon occurrence to be cruising down the highway when you suddenly encounter the burnt carcass of a diesel truck parked off the side of the highway. Speaking from personal experience, I have encountered 3 carcasses of burnt to the ground trucks on my commute from Mountain Home to Boise. And that's in a period of just a few months. This is a result of the particulate filter being clogged with soot. Thus it heats up beyond normal regeneration temperatures and simply catches the material around it in a dangerously hot flame. As we covered earlier, and we'll touch on in a slightly different light, this phenomenon results in massive wildfires and local burns that damage the environment through simple destruction. Besides just fires, DPF filters contain harmful heavy metals that pose a serious health concern. Under normal circumstances, these metals will not burn and will not pose any health risk. Such a concept is stressed by both the EPA and CARB, California Air Resource Board, with their statement holding true to the initial life of the filter. After only a few hundred miles of vehicle operation, the filters begin to clog with high concentrations of soot. High pressure exhaust gas creates excessive amounts of heat that release heavy metals that are harmful to the atmosphere and pose serious health concerns in terms of respiratory complications. All the aforementioned information was gained from a study done by DieselNet, a committed diesel preservation site. People also misinterpret the black smoke emitted by diesel engines as terrible for the environment. Truth is, the black soot simply falls back to Earth in the form of base and carbon compound. Dirt, in essence. The invisible exhaust gases emitted by diesels also contains much less carbon monoxide than other ozone-damaging compounds compared to gas engines. Thus, a big rig is actually more environmentally friendly than a Prius concerning ozone depletion. The aforementioned information was gained by ncbi.mlm.gov. Most companies burn out the filters in the end anyways. Therefore, the compounds trapped into the filters by soot do not get converted into other harmless elements, but rather enter the atmosphere containing a higher concentration of harmful mass. The same is true if you were to pour a gallon of oil on the ground or a gallon of oil into the sea. That oil will stay clumped for longer versus small particulates spread over an area. They'll be able to break down quicker, just as a radioactive half-life. Contrary to popular belief, it is actually better for the harmful substances to be spread over a vast area. If there are only small concentrations over a large land mass, the impact per unit area will not be as significant. Besides just emissions, the EPA requirements also result in an extensive amount of excess material waste. The DPF filters are extremely hard on engines. Thus, the engine will only survive for approximately 1/10 of their previous service life when referring to older vehicles without the DPF filters. I personally have seen trucks with problems caused by filters broken in junkyards with only 100,000 miles on them, whereas pre-filter era trucks can go upwards of 3 million miles, and there is cases with more. Many of the materials the new trucks are made of are not candidates to be recycled, and many centers do not possess the technology to do so. Therefore, trucks are just left to sit and leach toxins in the surrounding land, simply adding to the environmental catastrophe. The same concept holds true to the filters themselves. Many recyclers cannot process the metals within the catalyst material and will simply throw them out, despite their value. If a truck goes through 20 filters in a lifetime, that could amount to over a half ton of wasted metal, 1,000 pounds. It is also very difficult to bind the catalyst material to the honeycomb structure of the EPA filter. Thus, new and unrefined production techniques take place, many of which remain unregulated. As the most unregulated production, companies will try and save money by rejecting safety and environmental hazard concerns. The result is a more harmful material such as lead or machine coolant being released into the surrounding environment. Here at Diesel Change, we know our shit when it comes to diesel motors. These are 3 examples of vintage diesel motors, one of which still runs. These are being recycled into parts to be used on this one to be able to put it back as a working member of diesel society.
The problem presented by the EPA's absurd regulations have severe economic repercussions, primarily on small businesses. In the past, smaller businesses, startups, or owner-operators were able to buy used vehicles as a more cost-effective way to conduct their business. This allowed more companies to enter the trucking business, which meant more work, cheaper prices on consumer goods, and created a booming trucking industry. Now, we have companies that have used these vehicles for years. They run through generations, they run, there's no cost. No longer. Now they have to update their fleet. I reached out to a company in California, the place where exhaust regulations are the strictest and is becoming the trend for the entire nation. And I asked them how these regulations have affected their business. They're now forced to spend more money to get the filters, on top of retrofitting their trucks, which also takes time out. The cost breakdown is as follows. The initial cost of the filter is $15,000, and every 90 days, the filter must be serviced, which costs $400 on top of lost revenue due to the ability to no longer move said product. They've also noticed the filters are prone to foul prematurely, which causes bad injectors, lower fuel economy, and a lessened engine life. And bad injectors for a big rig, it's horrible. It's a complete motor rebuild. It costs tens of thousands of more dollars, and we're back to the problem of trucks not running, money's not being made. The damage done, however, is not just limited to these trucks. The filters also cause the exhaust gases to be superheated, which causes fires to the trucks and the surroundings. Many farmers no longer allow particulate filter equipped trucks to enter their property due to them setting crops on fire. Now you not only have a lawsuit involved with the trucking company and the farmer, you also have a truck that is now damaged and down, and you have a farmer who has lost goods, which reflects back onto the market because now prices will be higher for the goods that farmer is producing due to his loss of crop, because it's a widespread problem. Another company in California, PC Mechanical, experienced one of these said fires. A diesel motorhome was in their shop for servicing. The filter retained so much heat that it caught the entire motorhome on fire, partially burned the vehicle next to it, and caused damage to the shop. This did not happen during normal working hours. They fired the motorhome up, they had done their repairs to it, or were in the process of doing repairs to it. Everyone left the shop. It then caught fire, caused scoring on the roof of the building, and it also severely damaged that other vehicle, as mentioned. All of these unforeseen expenses are directly linked to the new particulate filters. Small business is already a difficult way to make a living. Forcing them to ruin their equipment and run a very high risk of property damage is forcing them to go under. In order to stay afloat, these businesses are unable to raise wages, many cut benefits, and must raise prices. This is a direct correlation on our economy because any material item at some point is transported by a truck. It was true in the 50s when Jimmy Hoffa said it. It's true now. If you got it, it got there by a truck. This impact does not just touch the lives of truckers or their families, but rather the whole ecosystems and other demographics.
Hello, Jared Childs. I just wanted to continue our discussion on EPA regulations and their effect on our culture and how it impacts us that way. That'll have to do with 3 things: national pride loss, trucking cultural stress, and middle-class suffering. When we get into our damage to American sites, we're discussing specifically the trucking background nationally. It is our pride. We are heavily focused as a nation, specifically on diesel vehicles, trucks. And when we fall back on that as a nation, we don't look as prideful, we don't look as strong. Another thing that these EPA regulations have done is also they've affected our nature or Mother Earth and caused fires, a lot of emissions, ruined national prides and treasures in wildlife reserves and forests, stuff that we don't want to mess with because it makes us look bad. Idea 2, we discussed the destruction of the trucking culture. That'll have to do with personal rigs. A lot of the time the workers, they can't personalize or customize their own setup because they're not able to pay for it. A lot of the times these regulations and such by the EPA mean that they have to have a lot of upkeep on their vehicles, and they can't come out and pay for it on top of their personal customization and stuff. And while we're on the idea of paying things off, a lot of the time these people are stressed about that money. They're always focused on what they got to pay next, which means they can't focus on their work all the time. It makes it harder on them. Third and finally, we discuss reduced blue-collar middle class, and that has to do with less financial stability and less hires for trucking. In the financial stability, we're talking about blue-collar workers in general because they do, in a sense, typically use diesel trucks, which have a lifting capability, and they're just better overall for handling. A lot of times, those families, through EPA regulations on their diesel trucks, will find that they have to pay for a lot of things, and so they're not as adept or inept to pay for more expensive things, including their children's education. So now their child can't go on and be educated and not have the same job and be stuck in a dead-end job where they will be paying for everything else on top of their regular responsibilities. We also find that, lastly, a lot of people don't want to be hired or won't be employed because they already know of the consequences of these EPA regulations. It's really weird how little we think about these things when they affect us every second of the day.